Welcome to the Warehouse Engineering Podcast. This is an audio-only episode where I'm summarizing an article I've written a couple of years ago about the risk involved in large projects. You can find the link to the article in the description below. The risk of large projects. Today, we're going to take a closer look at something that affects nearly every company working in logistics automation. I'm talking about large projects, the really big ones, the ones that are supposed to change everything, revolutionize operations, and show the world what your company can do. And yet, the experience from the field paints a very different picture. Large automation projects are risky, and quite often they turn out to be unprofitable. Despite this, many sales teams in the automation world seem obsessed with chasing these so-called white elephants. We've been seeing many of them, driven by rising demand, eager tech companies, and the excitement that surrounds automation in general. But the question remains, if everyone wants them, why do these projects so often disappoint? Back when I worked full-time in the warehouse automation industry, I noticed something. I rarely saw a large project, let's say anything over 50 million euros in order volume, that actually made a profit for the system supplier. And this was not a problem exclusive to us. Most of our competitors, as I've learned over the years, had the same problem. Some were beneficial for the customer, sure, but even that wasn't guaranteed. And from a supplier's perspective, one failed large project could wipe out the profits of several successful medium-sized ones. I once brought this up in a project management seminar I was conducting in Norway, which happened to be attended by a group of professionals from the oil and gas industry. I wasn't expecting much resonance, but to my surprise they immediately agreed. They said that all the prestigious, high-profile projects, the ones senior management was so focused on, had lost money. Every single one. A few days later, on a flight home from a client visit, I sat next to a commissioning engineer. He worked for a company that builds large industrial mixers. We talked about project sizes, what was typical in his field, and eventually I asked him whether the big projects ever turned a profit. His answer came instantly. No, he said, the big ones always lose money. But management still wants them. These were three very different industries: warehouse automation, oil and gas, industrial mixers. And yet the story was the same. It made me wonder, is there a deeper structural reason why large projects so often go wrong? I believe there is. The problems are systemic. And it starts with complexity. We all love the idea of simplicity, but the bigger a project gets, the more moving parts it has. And those parts don't operate in isolation. They interact. The more interaction you have, the harder it becomes to predict what's going to happen. This isn't just a matter of complicated. A system can be complicated, but still understandable. You can take it apart, look at the pieces, and figure out how it works. Complexity is different. In a complex system, you can't explain the overall behavior just by looking at the components. Change one thing and unexpected consequences pop up elsewhere. And often, there's a time delay between cause and effect, which makes learning from mistakes extremely difficult. You could argue that there is no such thing as complexity in mechanical systems. These are deterministic, because all components act in accordance to well-known, predefined, hard-coded rules. And so what I describe as complex behavior is merely an indication of hasty work and lack of thoroughness. And indeed, a mechanical system, even one controlled by software, is closer to a mechanical clockwork than it is to, say, the interaction between different species in an ecological system. But this perspective misses 2 points. First, in complex systems too, all agents act based on predefined local rules, which is why agent-based modeling is a great way to simulate complex system behavior. Secondly, there is no practical difference between opacity, the difficulty of looking through and comprehending system behavior, even of a non-complex but complicated system, and actual complexity. One is an epistemological problem, the other one is ontological, but that's a distinction without difference. I'm borrowing from Nassim Taleb here. To give a concrete example, imagine changing the load carrier in an automated warehouse design. That one decision might affect the racking, the conveyor layout, the robot picking logic, even the delivery van configuration. Maybe the new carrier doesn't work in deep freeze temperatures. Maybe it changes your packaging density and therefore your transport requirements. You probably won't realize all the consequences until it's too late. Another example, a customer increases their SKU count from 5,000 to 15,000. Now your front zone loop doesn't work, inventory coverage drops, and your entire layout might need rethinking. Or a senior manager suddenly decides the system must support 1-hour delivery, which is an entirely different optimization problem than what the team designed for. Complexity increases both the chance of failure and the difficulty of fixing it. And because large projects mean large budgets, even small failures can have massive consequences. The penalties, the missed deadlines, the reputational damage, they all scale with the size of the project. There's also another effect that's more subtle but no less dangerous. Large projects are addictive. Once you land a €100 million deal, it's hard to get excited about €5 million projects again. Not just for the individual salesperson, but for management, for the company, for everyone watching. Large projects are addictive for 3 reasons. Psychologically, large becomes the new normal. Economically, if the big project turns sour, you suddenly need more large projects to make up for the shortfall, including the shortfall in cash flow. And organizationally, you've built up teams and infrastructure for large-scale execution. Without another big project, those resources sit idle. So you chase another one, and the cycle repeats. And there's something else, ripple effects. Large projects don't just affect the team assigned to them. They affect everything around them. Because large projects are high profile, they attract management attention. And when things go wrong, they also attract resources. Those resources are usually working on other projects. So now it's not just one big project at risk. It's 5 or 6 smaller ones too. And in order to fix that one large project, you delay 5 or 6 smaller ones, which, by the way, are precisely the projects that would make you the money you need to pay for the losses of the larger project. I've seen this pattern most clearly when IT systems were involved. Senior managers, often with limited technical understanding, assume that adding more people will fix an IT issue faster. But it rarely works like that. By the way, there is an old, but nonetheless up-to-date book about this, called The Mythical Man Month, which should be required reading in project management classes. Meanwhile, other projects suffer, deadlines slip, quality drops, all because the big project sucked up the oxygen in the room. And then there's the cost you don't see, opportunity cost. If you tie up 5 engineers for a year on a massive project, that's 5 people who aren't working on 3 smaller projects. And those smaller projects might have been more profitable, more stable, and more strategically valuable. But once the big project starts, those alternatives are off the table. There is something else. This pattern of chasing ever larger projects often marks the end of a boom. People get comfortable. Risk aversion fades. Budgets stretch. Assumptions go unchecked. And while the excitement is high, the margin for error disappears. Even if the project looks safe when you sign the contract, the economic landscape may have shifted by the time implementation begins. Financing might become harder. Interest rates might climb, as it happened not so long ago. Market demand may drop, as it happened for many companies not so long ago. And if your customer hits financial trouble, guess what? You'll feel it too. Cash flow becomes uncertain. Payments are delayed. Your own organization, which was counting on this revenue to fund growth or stabilize other projects, suddenly faces a shortfall. The bigger the project, the greater the exposure. Let me repeat the factors outlined above briefly. The combination of complexity, large projects' addictive nature, ripple effects, opportunity cost, and macroeconomic timing create a risk profile that not only makes failure likely, but also leads to severe consequences. Now, you may argue that large projects come with large benefits. More revenue, more prestige, more momentum. But let's look at the balance. Yes, the upside grows with project size, but at best it grows linearly. But the downside, the potential for failure, grows exponentially. If a small project fails, it's an unpleasant hit. It's a learning experience. If a big one fails, it can take down the whole company. So, no, the benefits don't balance out the risks. Not once you factor in scale. What can we do? We can't walk away from large projects altogether. But we should be clear-eyed. We should have honest conversations with ourselves, with our teams, and with our customers. Be transparent about the risks. Acknowledge the uncertainties. Discuss what happens if things don't go according to plan. Because frequently, things will not go according to plan. Also realize that not every large project is equally risky. Some companies have repeatable concepts, copy-paste designs that they've optimized and refined. For them, even a €100 million project may be low risk, as long as the customer lets them stick to the plan. But as soon as that customer says, we want to do it differently, chaos becomes a real possibility. It's not size alone that causes trouble, it's size combined with novelty. Finally, take a close look at your sales funnel. If one large project represents more than half your annual target, you're overexposed. The rule of thumb I often share is this. If any project in your pipeline exceeds 50% of your annual order target, you better be prepared for trouble 2 years down the road. 2 years down the road is somewhat difficult to grasp. Time delay between cause and effect inhibits learning. But you better have some spare resources available. So, large projects will always be tempting. But they need to be treated with care, with structure, and above all, with humility. If you've had your own experience with the large projects, whether they went well or not, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to send me a message via email or LinkedIn. And one final note. I originally wrote the article this episode is based on in 2019. That was before COVID, before the war in Ukraine, before the last disastrous German federal government, and before the return of protectionist trade policies. Several of the risks I highlighted back then have since become reality. So, I believe when it comes to large projects, we need to ask ourselves, are we overexposed? Are we chasing the wrong price? There's no way of knowing when exactly the economy changes. And forecasts frequently are wrong. To borrow from Taleb again, the only thing you can do to reduce your chance of a blow-up is to minimize your exposure to large-scale risk that comes with large-scale projects. Reduce fragility. Thank you for listening, and until next time.